for having me here today in sunny Bundaberg.
Bring the mic up.
Yeah, I think we'll have to get that up a little bit. Okay, is that a bit better? Look, basically there is a global gas glut. There's too much LNG floating around the world at the moment, liquefied natural gas, and that's going to last out to about 2023. Globally, prices for gas have not fallen, they've actually collapsed. And I think it's really important to realise that globally prices for gas at the moment are very, very cheap, and in Australia they're very, very expensive. Demand for gas is falling in Australia, and that's pretty simple as an economist. It's too expensive, and the higher you price a commodity, the less demand there is. And with gas in Australia, that's certainly the case. And we'll run through industrial demand and also gas demand for power generation in that. There's a cartel of players in Australia that control the gas market and set the price for gas. It's not really a market, it's actually an oligopoly. It's much like the big banks setting prices for interest rates. It's the same with the gas guys. They just set the price, and they set it at a very high price for Australian domestic consumers. Gas sets the price for electricity. Now that's a little bit complicated, but I will explain how that works in the presentation. But it's the last player into the national electricity market, which includes Queensland. All the East Coast is in one market now for electricity. And the most amazing thing of the lot, I think, to me, which I do have trouble explaining, and I hope I will be able to, is that Australia will become an import-supply market under current policy settings by the federal and state governments around the nation. The world's second largest exporter currently, which is Australia, and soon to be the world's largest exporter of gas in the world, LNG in the world, will be an import-supplied market. Yeah, it does my head in, and I'm sure it probably does yours in too. And then I'll talk about how they're building too many import terminals, just like they built too many LNG facilities up at Gladstone. So some really basic background for you here on this is from the government. It's a government slide. There's just some really basic details for you. Now, if you go up to the very top left of that slide, you can see that to get gas into LNG, you have to cool it down to minus 162 degrees Celsius. Now, they are 3 giant fridges you have up at Gladstone, essentially, right? And we all know how much it costs to run a fridge, especially if you own a cafe or something like that. They're very energy intensive process is what I'm trying to get at, and that's important later on when I talk a little bit about, I only touch on the climate implications of gas, but it is pretty mind-blowing, the climate implications. What the map of Australia shows you is that the plants at Gladstone are really only a small part of the LNG industry. Most of the LNG industry is up on the northwest shelf and up off Darwin. And the one thing I would like to point out is this share of current share of LNG exports in 2018. That's a movable feast, especially the US, and the US is becoming a very large exporter. It'll be similar size to Qatar and Australia within about 3 years if their current plans are implemented. This is, look, I was at a conference in New York a couple of years ago talking about gas, and funnily enough, I was explaining how there was going to be a global glut in gas, and it was a bit of a novel concept back then. It's not anymore because it's actually arrived. And this is a slide from Morgan Stanley, a big merchant bank, and they're telling you, you can see demand in blue. MS is Morgan Stanley, that's what that stands for, Morgan Stanley demand projections. And the sort of, I don't know, what colour you'd call it, sort of a light brown colour. That's actually the existing capacity, and you can see that the capacity is well above the demand. Right, it's well above the demand right the way out to 2023, which means basically we're producing too much, and that's why prices are so low globally for gas. Prior to the opening of the plants at Gladstone in 2014-15, we saw reasonable prices for gas in Australia. They were about $3 to $4 a gigajoule. So just keep that figure in your minds. $3 to $4 is what we paid for many decades before then. After they opened up, gas prices peaked at about $21 for contract gas, which was obscene. They've since come back a bit, but are still about roughly 3 times what they used to be. 3 to 4 times what they used to be, at about $8 to $12. This is from the US government, this slide. It's showing global gas prices, and basically they're around $6.30 Australian and MMBTU in Asia at the moment. Sorry, gigajoule in Asia at the moment, $6.30 Australian. Now what happened was that the gas prices were so high that the government commissioned the ACCC to look into them, and they had this big gas price inquiry, and then they extended that inquiry because gas prices were still ridiculously high and people were complaining in industry. And so they came up with a price, and they called it the LNG netback price, which was the price we should be paying for gas. And that's in green. And as you can see, the price in, I do have this one for Queensland too. I don't know why I've got the wrong slide in here, but anyway, it's very similar for Queensland. Let me assure you, it's not much different in shape. But you can see here that the prices are, this is a Japanese price, this is the Australian price, and that's the price we should be paying. So we're paying more than the Japanese are for gas. Australian gas here today, we pay more than they do in Japan. That's after liquefying it and shipping it. And as I've already told you, liquefying it is very expensive. You've got these giant fridges to get it up there, to cool it down, to compress the gas, to get it on the ship, to get it up to Japan. The green line is what we should be paying. Now, across the east coast of Australia, I worked out recently, we were paying about 71% more than we should be, according to the ACCC. So it's not a little margin more, it's a massive amount more than we should be being paid. Now this was a government commissioned report by the ACCC, commissioned by the government to work out a price, and it's telling you we're paying 71% too much. It's something seriously wrong here, guys. It's not just a little bit wrong, it is wrong with a capital W. This is a slide that shows, this is from the Australian government as well, Bureau down in Canberra there. What it's actually showing you is the contract price and the spot prices for gas in Asia. And there's this huge difference at the moment that's opened up. Normally the two, you can see historically, the two basically tracked along pretty much the same, the short-term and the long-term prices, and they've gone like this, they've diverged. Now why that's really important is that situation is just unsustainable. And it can only go one way. You have to actually see the contract prices collapse or the spot price rise up. You cannot have that big a gap. It just won't last, because it won't. So what we have on the East Coast, we have a small number of players controlling the price. And they're setting the price above, as I said, international prices. And that's really the key point. Now, you don't have to believe me on that, but you do have to believe the people that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars investigating, putting in import terminals into Australia, the world's second largest exporter of LNG. These include companies such as Twiggy Forrest, one entrepreneur who's seen the opportunity and is jumping in there, but it also includes large international trading houses that own a lot of LNG. People like, it's called JERA, a Japanese group, Mitsubishi, who I'm sure you've all heard of, Marubeni, which is another large Japanese trading house. It includes people like ExxonMobil, AGL. All these people are in consortia to set up import terminals. If they all set them up and all build them, Australia will be 88% supplied by imports. Just start thinking about that. It's very expensive to export, and yet we're going to be supplied with very expensive imported gas, rather than getting our gas out of a pipe that simply arrives. That's just for reference, that's who they are, but we've talked about the things, so we'll just move on. Climate change effects, it's really interesting. These giant fridges use around 3% of the total demand for electricity on the east coast of Australia to run the 3 plants at Gladstone. It's incredibly energy intensive. And they use 150 petajoules of gas a year, which is about 28% of East Coast demand for gas. Not just Queensland's demand for gas, but the entire East Coast market demand for gas. So when we're talking about becoming an import supply market, we're going to be burning all this gas and using all this electricity to then put it on a ship, bring it back around the coast, burn more gas and electricity, burn more diesel fuel, and then we'll put it back in the system and then we'll use it. It's the most incredibly wasteful process that I can possibly think of. Essentially, you're burning about somewhere, depending on which figures you use, and there is some, if you like, discussion over how much gas is used in the liquefaction process, but it's somewhere between 8 and 11% of the gas will be burnt before you even get to touch it, just by doing that. It is quite depressingly wasteful. Now, what has all these high prices meant? Well, it's meant that industrial demand's going down. On the east coast of Australia, demand for gas is down 14% since 2014, and demand for gas-fired power generation, to generate your electricity. This is the transition fuel, by the way. Remember that gas industry stuff where they talked about gas being a transition fuel to renewables, and it was meant to be the big boom in gas usage? Well, in Australia, gas-fired power generation is down 40%.